Animation is not dead. Animation will never be dead. Nonetheless, I believe, reflecting on the dearth of great animated shows recently, and how that dearth has come about as a result of a broader sea change in the greater media landscape, that the most recent golden age of animation has come to an end. This is an age that brought us shows from Avatar: The Last Airbender to Gravity Falls to Steven Universe to The Owl House and Amphibia, to shows whose conclusions help signal the end of that age. This age came about as a result of specific trends and societal factors. Persisted and replicated itself through these quite reliable links wherein brilliant artists and animators and writers who worked on previous shows will go on to work on the next generation of brilliant and daring programs. They invented their own shows after gaining experience. And then this golden age ended. Not simply because the shows stopped being good, although the accelerated production process necessitated, especially by Netflix, did indeed lead to a drop in quality, but also because the sociocultural conditions that led to the birth of the media landscape that gave us the second golden age of animation, as I'm calling it, no longer existed. Instead, we are immersed in this streaming world of chaos and uncertainty, where the old paradigms have finished and there is not really a clear indicator of what kinds of new shows in the long term will flourish in this new media landscape. I will go through each of these stages cohesively and comprehensively, or at least as much as I can, speaking with just a handful of notes in the relatively condensed format of my videos. The golden age I am discussing starts sometime in the early to mid 2000s. One could possibly consider Teen Titans as a part of this, but it really coalesces into something daring and innovative and new with Avatar: The Last Airbender in 2005. Before proliferating in shows like The Regular Show, Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, etc. This rebirth of animation on television does not owe itself merely to one network. Disney Channel played a significant role, so did Cartoon Network, and even Nickelodeon to an extent. It did give the platform for Konietzko and DiMartino to make Avatar, after all. far too many people look at Cal Arts as a kind of origin point for this modern age of animation, regardless of whether they hold that age of animation up for praise or blame. But I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. Yes, Cal Arts is extremely relevant as a pipeline for the animation industry. And it is especially relevant for Disney as a whole. One of Walt Disney's last projects before he died was the steps toward creating this new place for the training of animators and the study of animation. It merged together these two different pre-existing schools into something far more ambitious and far more distinctly Disney and distinctly California. A place where animation was not just taught, but it was something to be immersed in. The process started under Disney, but was completed after his death. And yes, Cal Arts has been extremely influential throughout the animation industry, but that has been the case for a long time. That's not something new. And the whole idea of there being this Cal Arts style is rather reductive and oversimplistic. To really contemplate where this age of animation came from, one really has to think about what changed. And it's a few things. There is this burst of possibilities created by cable TV. There are all these different channels that aren't the three beacons of NBC, CBS, ABC that people were stuck with for generations. This was something new and a bit more niche. And a bit more niche means there is more of an opportunity to be creative. There's more of an opportunity to experiment, to do things that are not necessarily safe bets. There is also a few precedents. Number one is the prevalence of so-called adult animation, which in reality is not particularly adult at all, but I mean things like The Simpsons or Family Guy, things that are very referential, that rely on a bit of slick, very Gen X humor that at its worst can be a bit snide and above it all, but at its best can be genuinely sharp and satirical in a way that creates a new style and a new approach apart from the desperately, passionately earnest grandeur of, say, classic Disney animation. The other influence is anime, which by the mid-90s, and especially by the early 2000s, has become not popular exactly, but influential. Anime nowadays is relatively mainstream. It is not rare that your average person would know who Hayao Miyazaki is, for example, whereas back in the early 2000s that would not have been the case. More people did than was the case before, and Spirited Away in the early 2000s was a major breakthrough for anime's popularity in the quote-unquote West. But nonetheless, anime was not nearly as influential to a mass audience as it is now. It was, however, increasingly influential to those working in the animation industry. more and more anime was coming over to America. There was this enormous boom in Japanese culture as a whole in the 1990s into the 2000s. There are very mainstream versions of this, or relatively mainstream, like Pokemon. But there's also a lot of this weird, challenging, more dramatic kind of animated storytelling that's slowly soaking into the minds of people who are working in animation. They are thinking, this is possible. This is being created across the ocean. And it's smart, it's clever, it's thoughtful. It demonstrates the capacity for animation to take these big swings, these big risks. And so there's a bit of this convergence. There's, on one side, this very dramatic, more serialized form of storytelling that's becoming more influential as a result of anime, and on the other side, there is this kind of slick, comedic, self-referential kind of comedy that's more popular as a result of the so-called adult animation. Someone like Konietzko or DiMartino, the co-creators of Avatar, are great examples of this confluence. They had a bit of experience working in the adult animation industry, but they were also deeply moved by anime, and Princess Mononoke specifically. This kind of sprawling, expansive, morally complicated and philosophical storytelling. They wanted to do something like that. In the more open world created by cable TV, there were places like Nickelodeon that were willing to take more of a chance on that kind of storytelling. But also, there is a discrepancy between the environment that allows this kind of storytelling to be produced and the kind that allows it to really prosper. There's one more ingredient I haven't mentioned yet, and that is the growth of the internet. People can share what they like with each other in ways that were not possible 20, 30 years ago. In the 90s, the internet is starting to become influential beyond academics and the military, but it's still very rudimentary. By the 2000s, it's still quite basic by modern standards. Social media certainly was only in its infancy, but people nonetheless had more of an opportunity to connect with each other about these nerdy, niche habits that they quite liked. If Avatar had aired, say, 10 years earlier, people would have liked it alright. But it would have been, just another good kids animated show. But in the 2000s, there was enough of a resemblance to the quote-unquote modern internet that people could share their passions for these characters and these storylines with each other. And so fandom really starts to burgeon. It really starts to develop into what it is now. Now, fandom, of course, has always been around. It's been around at least as long as there have been things to be fans of. But the modern conception of fandom depends on interactivity. It depends on sharing, and that is only really possible in a mass format in the age of the internet. Avatar was one of the first large fandoms to really occupy people's interests. During the long gaps between the end of season 2 of Avatar and the ending of the show, one can find all of these old posts on the internet where people are wondering what would happen, thinking about these characters, discussing which ones they like the best, and yes, even contemplating which couples they prefer. That kind of storytelling finds an audience because of the internet. And after that, people wanted more. And this golden age of animation prospered because there was a deep sense of apprenticeship, in a way. It's not exactly like the old guild system that existed in medieval Europe, but it's something similar to it, where people would join one of these acclaimed shows, get their expertise, and then after enough time they would go off and create their own show. This is what happened with Avatar and Korra. After the monumental success of Avatar, there was Korra, created by the same people, but there was also The Dragon Prince, created by Aaron Haas, who was the lead writer on Avatar. And after Korra, there was the Voltron reboot, created by Lauren Montgomery and Joaquim Dos Santos, who worked in significant positions on Korra. It went the same with Cartoon Network, where shows like The Regular Show and Adventure Time created an opportunity for proteges, people who had worked on those shows, to create other shows like Steven Universe and like Infinity Train. Or take the case of Gravity Falls, which allowed for Dana Terrace to make The Owl House and for Matt Brawley to make Amphibia. It was a system that worked well, and it's a shame that it ultimately ended. And that it ended has partly to do with the fact that there was this obsessive boom and bust orchestrated by Netflix, where Netflix saw this fandom, saw everyone being obsessed with these animated shows, and wanted in on that. They threw a lot of money at young, ambitious creators and wanted them to make a lot of seasons of these shows quickly. And what happens is that there is a slip in quality. People get tired. It's not that shows turn bad, but it's hard to create at such a consistently high level in that stressful environment. This is what happened to Voltron. Arguably, the same thing happened to She-Ra, created by Andy Stevenson. That kind of relentless pace is not good, and ultimately, when the streaming bubble popped a bit, especially for Netflix, and it realized that not all of these big investments in animation were necessarily worth it from a pure bottom line perspective, they pretty ruthlessly canceled shows and cut ties with these creators that they had invested so much money and effort in. Streaming caused harm in other ways too. As I discussed before, a lot of these animation ecosystems were possible because of cable TV, because of a specific paradigm, even if the shows needed exposure on the internet to really become as popular and acclaimed as they did become. Streaming swept the old cable TV world away. Cartoon Network is extremely struggling right now. It does not have a clear sense of direction for the future. The same is happening with Disney. Disney is trying to transition into streaming with Disney Plus, but Disney Plus is bleeding a lot of money. They do not know quite how to make shows that people want to watch that will make Disney money overall. The economics of streaming are a puzzle that no one has really figured out. And sadly, the space for shows like The Owl House and Amphibia to thrive, these detailed, story-driven shows, has steadily evaporated. And so, the Golden Age has come to an end. I'm not saying there are no good animated shows being made right now. Personally, I'm quite looking forward to Konietzko and DiMartino's next Avatar show. But it does mean that a specific, robust, imaginative world that had existed where creators had the chance to take risks and be a little daring and occupy these more niche spaces where the goal is not to make a lot of money immediately, but to find a broader audience on the internet and attract people who want to share and spread their passions for these shows and create this larger sense of fandom. That whole space, it doesn't really exist now in the same way that it did 10 or even 5 years ago, and that's a shame. But I think it's important to identify exactly what happened, why this age came about, and why it's a bit of a tragedy that it has gone away, washed away by the wild rush of the new streaming ecosystem. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, if you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Take care. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.